committee.
Public.
61.
I'm going to be sad we're not actually going to end it. It's not really. No, just. But I see the process in terms of point they were really agreed. Okay, folks, thanks very much for work. The committee is already in open session, so could I just go through some of the routine housekeeping matters? Could I just formally welcome everyone to the ASD committee meeting this morning, and could I ask everyone in the room to switch off all the electronic devices, telephones and so on? Could I remind members of the protocols around the use of their tablets, the electronic tablets? And could I ask any members to declare any interest relevant to today's agenda? There are none to be declared. We'll move on to apologies. Do we have any apologies to record?
Gregory Campbell.
Gregory Campbell. Any others? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, then moving on then to the next item of business. There's no. Do we have any residents? Okay, we want to take the short notice briefing first and foremost. Members, we're moving on swiftly then to just the issue around the executives, the plant maintenance contracts. And as members will recall, last week we took a fairly dim view across all of the members of the committee of the news that the housing executive and the contractors had concluded their negotiations, discussions around the contracts, and that the conclusions of that had been forwarded on to the DSD and DAP, and that then we were being informed then there wouldn't be any sign off of that until the end of July, and still open-ended at that point. The committee took a very strong view on that, in that we had been advised by, I think, Donald Hoodless that the negotiations had concluded and the report forwarded on to the department. I can't remember whether it was the 14th of May or 24th of May as it did in my mind, but nevertheless there was that report was forwarded on to both departments for sign off, and as I said, the members were very concerned across all of the parties of the impact of any delay in regard to this matter in terms of signing off on any discussion or negotiations. People were very concerned at, I suppose, two key elements. One, around the continuing delay of awarding contracts, and more importantly then, that outworking that people would need various maintenance carried out in their homes. So there was worried about a delay of maintenance being carried out in people's homes, and also the danger members felt of some of the contractors being forced into administration if this matter wasn't resolved, since there appeared to be money involved in that negotiation. We're not here this morning to deliberate on the actual process of negotiation. We're not here to work out about the result of the negotiation. Our concern was that's a discussion for another day. Those discussions and negotiations have taken place. What the committee was concerned about is that we want the matter expedited as quickly as possible, and we would repeat, as we did, I think, in writing, that the committee is concerned that we haven't been kept up to date in our view in a way which was appropriate, given that we were routinely told by senior officials that on some occasions on the very day that officials were attending this committee that the matter should be resolved today or very, very shortly thereafter. And it has taken to this point now where we still don't have confirmation of any negotiation which has been concluded but signed off on. And as I say, the two key concerns the committee would then have is about the impact that might have on contractors, and equally important to all of us, every one of us around the table had the view that it would impact negatively on those who need maintenance carried out in their homes. So on that basis we invited the Minister and whoever to come and address those matters. As I say, making it very clear we're not here to second guess the negotiations, to deliberate on the nature of the negotiations, how they've concluded. That's not our remit or business today. So we just want to make sure we remind ourselves that's a discussion perhaps for another day whenever the matter is concluded, if it is concluded. So Without any further ado, then, thank you, Minister, and Andrew and Will and Mags for being here this morning. So, over to yourselves. You have a letter from ourselves. We got a letter back from the Minister, I think, but we didn't receive it until the day after the committee. I think the date on the letter was made. We didn't receive it until the 10th to the 11th. Okay, so over to yourself, Minister.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I understand the committee at its meeting on the 10th of June 2014 expressed its dissatisfaction regarding the delay in beginning the new planned maintenance contracts and also my department's handling of the approval process in relation to the overpayments to planned maintenance contractors. You therefore wrote to me on the 10th of June to request that I attend the meeting today along with my accounting officers for the department and the housing sector as well. You've already made reference to the fact that I had written on the 9th of June when I became aware that there had been some discussion and what appeared to be some misunderstanding at the committee meeting on the 5th of June in relation to the housing executive's planned maintenance contracts. In view of that, I believe it would be useful to clarify the present position for the committee and therefore wrote to you as Chair. As indicated there, the letter wasn't at the attention of the committee members until subsequent to the meeting on the 10th. So it may be helpful then if I clarify the position as detailed in that letter dated the 9th of June. As you're aware, the Housing Executive has advised that the parties have reached a position where it's anticipated that this matter will be resolved by agreement, and this is subject to relevant approvals from the Department of Social Development and the Department of Finance and Personnel being obtained. In relation to that, the Housing Executive submitted a proposed settlement and accompanying documentation to my department on the 23rd of May, seeking DSD and DFP approval for a settlement between the Housing Executive and its planned maintenance contractors. This is a substantial and complex set of documents which, in line with due diligence, is now being reviewed by my officials. Following the completion of due diligence, and if my department agrees that the settlement and write-off is deemed appropriate, DFP approval will also then be required. I can assure you that my officials are working to bring this matter to a conclusion in line with the guidance and principles for managing public resources as set out in the DFP guidance Managing Public Money Northern Ireland. Indeed, this was discussed at an early stage with the Housing Executive, and my officials have already formally written to the Housing Executive to seek clarity and further information on a number of key issues. In relation to the letting of new planned maintenance contracts, the position in relation to the proposed settlement does not affect these contracts, which were in fact awarded on the 1st of May 2014. And enabling meetings are already underway in order for planned maintenance schemes to begin. I'm aware that the Housing Executive is currently working with the newly appointed planned maintenance contractors and the managing consultants to get schemes on the ground as soon as practicable. Previously, when I wrote to you, we thought that this might be in the autumn, but there's been some progress here, and in due course, Mags will update you on that. Like the committee, I have and continue to stress to both the Chair and Chief Executive of the Housing Executive that they must ensure their maintenance budget is fully spent. They have assured me that they are working with contractors to make sure this happens. And I note that at June monitoring, they remained confident they could deliver and make use of their full budget, and this is something that I will continue to monitor closely. I fully expect, therefore, the Housing Executive spend this year to be significantly greater than in any of the previous 3 years. In your letter dated 10th of June, you specifically asked a number of questions which you asked me to address today, and I will clarify as follows. You asked for details on what steps are being taken to ensure that the approval of the agreement between the Housing Executive and contractors concludes swiftly. I've already assured you that my officials are working to bring this to a conclusion as soon as possible in line with the appropriate guidance. The Housing Executive delivered the submission to my department on Friday the 23rd of May, and following the bank holiday on the 26th of May, work began on this immediately. My staff have already gone back with queries to the Housing Executive to ensure we can fully check this complex work and answer the questions that DFP will rightly ask if my department agrees the settlement and write-off. You also ask for an explanation as to why the approval process has taken so long and when this is expected to be finalised. The negotiations, which are a matter for the Housing Executive, have taken some considerable time to come to a proposed settlement, as there were a number of parties involved and the issues have been, as you're aware, very complex. The approval process, however, has not taken so long, quote, as I have already advised that this is a substantial and complex set of documents sent to my department on the 23rd of May, which my officials are now carrying out due diligence on in line with the DFP guidance on managing public money. Following the completion of due diligence, and if my department agrees that the settlement and write-off is deemed appropriate, DFP approval will also then be required. You also ask for confirmation as to when the new planned maintenance contracts will begin. The committee was updated as far back as the 8th of May in relation to the planned maintenance contracts, when the Acting Chief Executive attended the committee meeting and advised that the planned maintenance contracts had already been let. My officials also wrote to the committee on the 3rd of June and advised that the planned maintenance contracts were awarded on the 1st of May 2014. As I've indicated earlier, the Housing Executive is now working with contractors to get schemes on the ground. We were notified on the 31st of January 2014 that the double glazing contracts were signed. The Housing Executive was advised that both the Ballymoney scheme, 69 dwellings, and Foyle Crescent, 26 dwellings, are well advanced. And it's expected that the Ballymoney scheme will commence on site before the end of this month. Finally, you seek clarification as to what assurances I have been able to provide to those contractors who have been awarded these contracts regarding their starting date. That's an operational matter for the Housing Executive. And I'm sure Max Lightbody, the Acting Chief Executive, can advise the committee on the current position. Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Minister, could you just, before I hand over to members, in Annex A of the response from yourself, it says that, let me today clarify the positions detailed in my letter dated the 9th of June. As you're aware, the Housing Executive has advised that the parties have reached a position where it is anticipated that this matter will be resolved by agreement, and this is subject to relevant approvals from my department and so on. I mean, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but that doesn't sound as if there has been agreement already concluded by the Housing Executive and the contractors.
Well, there has been an agreement reached between the Housing Executive and the contractors. The point was being made there that before that can be finalised, there has to be due diligence carried out by DSD and ultimately by DFP. That's the process that applies, right across all departments. There's a process that has to be carried out there, and that's what is now being done and will be completed as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that, Minister. Jim Mollister.
Could I ask the Housing Executive, during the negotiations, how far did the Housing Executive keep the department informed?
My understanding, and I wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, took up post at the beginning of April, but my understanding was through the monthly meetings there were regular updates with the department and how negotiations were progressing.
So the documents delivered on the 23rd of May wouldn't have come as a surprise to the department?
I think fair to say we were working closely to make sure all of the preparations were done in advance of then the formal, very detailed business case submission.
So the department knew the figures of the settlement long before the 23rd of May, yes?
Again, I couldn't comment on exactly what happened before I took up post and tenure, but we were starting to prepare the department from when I came into post. But again, the formal document didn't come over until the 23rd of May.
When had it been through the board of the Housing Executive?
The board made its decision on the detail of the settlement at the March meeting. The board then formally would have signed off the full business case submission at a special meeting on the 14th of May, so detail and numbers, and then the full pack and submission on the 14th.
So why did it take from the March board meeting to the 23rd of May to get the formal package delivered to the department?
That would have been working through the detail. So we had gone to the board, my understanding, on the 26th of March with the numbers involved. And then we were working up the actual legal agreement. So signatures on the agreement followed after that period. And then we were able to present the full package of information and had taken some soundings from the department on the nature and detail that they would require to help them move as fast as possible. So that was the intervening period. Me as new acting chief executive, making sure we had all of the settlement absolutely signed, and then preparing the case and full board
So
sign-off.
the situation is, there's a legal settlement signed between the housing executive and the contractors, yes?
Yep.
Now, is it the case that the department was acquainted with the terms of that settlement before it was signed by the housing executive?
The signature would have been round about mid to late April on the document. We were working from me taking up post to start to familiarise the department with the details, but again, no formal package having been handed over. We had discussions again to just make sure the process would run as
Yes,
smoothly
but the
as
question was the department aware of the detail of the settlement before it was signed?
I'll perhaps
Maybe-
refer to colleagues over
Yeah,
the time.
We would have been aware that there were negotiations ongoing. They actually took longer than we were given to expect, because
Yes, we're
I
never aware
remember,
about that. Just
I
tell us
remember
whether or
coming
not
to you saying
it
it looked as
approved.
if things were edging towards, a resolution. We wouldn't have known the details that we've got in the pack is new to us. That was the level of detail that's necessary to secure the approval of the department and the DFP.
Did you know
There's an awful lot.
Did you know the sign-off figure that had been agreed?
Did we know the settlement? There's a difference
settlement figure,
between the
yes.
settlement figure
Yes.
and the write-off
Yes, I
figure.
appreciate that.
At the end of the process, and only at the end of the process, would we have known what the settlement was. That came we weren't involved in this at all. It was something that was being dealt with through the independent advisors of the executive and housing executive and the contractual representatives. We were not involved in that
I'm
process.
just going to go
whatsoever.
back to Mr. Whitefield. So there is a legally signed off settlement with the contractors, yes?
The contractors have signed a document with us, and that won't be fully signed off until we have
But
consent.
the housing executive has also signed.
The signature, I understand, and I would want to check that, the signature from Housing Exec has not been added until we have full approvals, but I would want to just check that level of detail.
Has it been signed by council?
It would have been signed by contractors.
Just the contractors?
That's my impression.
Has the housing executives council signed off?
The agreement, I understand, is to the two parties, which would be the contractors individually and the Housing Exec. Again, I would want to check the detail, but the contractors have signed and
So the
signed.
situation is, the board approves the settlement in March, and here we are at the end of June, and though the contractors have played their part by signing off and making whatever compromises or whatever were involved in their part, the housing executive still hasn't signed off on this settlement.
The Housing Executive and the contractors are clear that we have reached agreement, so the contractors and ourselves are absolutely together that we have
Yes.
an agreed position.
Okay, and you have recommended that to the department.
We have recommended to our board and now sought the approvals of the department to the settlement.
Minister, are you just playing for time? Are you trying to run this down to the recess?
No.
Because we hear much about due diligence, but it might strike some of us there wasn't much due diligence about the announcement of the 18 million.
We've heard about due diligence because indeed, as I indicated earlier, there is guidance set out for all government departments as to how they deal with such matters, and that is being pursued carefully and thoroughly.
But the department's not ignorant and wasn't ignorant throughout this as to where this settlement was heading. It now knows every last jot of the detail of it, but it was well informed throughout the process. So why is it taking the department to beyond the end of the Assembly term, for example, to approve or disapprove this settlement?
The process that is gone through in such matters is long and complex, and I have seen that in the past where we have sent cases through to DFP from our officials in regard to a whole range of things. It could be European grants, it could be a whole range of things, and they will come back with queries. It's important that you get all the things that are likely to arise cleared up and absolutely certain. You have absolute certainty around them before you send on, because that shortens the process. So the thing is being taken forward as quickly as possible, but the timescale, because of the scale of this, the complexity of it, isn't that surprising.
So should we understand that nothing has yet gone to DFP?
Precisely what has gone, Alistair can explain.
Yeah, we have alerted DFP clearly that this is coming to them. The custom and practice associated with the clearance of cases and business cases such as this is for the department to do the due diligence first, so that there's nugatory work avoided when it comes to DFP. So we're in that process. I don't accept, to be honest with you, Chair and Mr. Alistair, that there has been undue delay here. This involves public expenditure on contracts over a 4-year period of 172 million. There has been an agreement reached between the Housing Executive and the contractors, which, but when it comes down to it, that is involved in reaching that detailed sampling work and extrapolations to come to.
Department.
But we have to take a view. If we are standing behind this, because that is what we are being asked to do under public money, where there is a write-off of public money, yes, we have to put the case to DFP. We have to stand behind the case. It's not a case of someone passing us the ball and we say over to you, DFP. When we put this to DFP...
Well, it was a case of, accepting the ball and announcing 18 million overcharge.
The process that we are involved in now is determined by the managing public money. That is where we are, and there is very clear obligations on the department to take a view on whether the case that is being made is sufficient to justify the write-off which is involved here. That process involves us in assessing very detailed sampling approaches, detailed figures, and of both alleged overpayments and associated compensating events. That's the process. It also involves us taking legal advice on whether we believe sufficient has been done to recover all monies that would have been due. And that's the process.
Would the Housing Executive have taken that legal advice?
Irrespective of whether the Housing Executive has taken that advice, as part of our process, we have to take that independent advice.
So the Housing Executive has a QC who's effectively said, I recommend this settlement. The Housing Executive, on foot of that, has recommended it to the board. The board has recommended it to you. And now you start the process of taking your own legal advice.
That is where we are. That is
How long is that going to take?
Well, we're hopeful of getting that in the next few days. But that is where we are. That is the demands and obligations that the system places on us. This is not new. We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything different than what any other department would be doing if it was faced with similar issues.
What about the duty of care to the contractors? The department was very quick to badmouth the contractors in the most public of forums. Now, none of us live in a bubble. We all know that this 18 million has evaporated like snow off a ditch. So when is someone going to man up and apologise to the contractors and apologise for ruining some of their reputations? When's that going to happen?
I think the key point is to get back to what the chairman said at the start about the remit of the meeting this morning. And the remit this morning is not to look back to certain things. That there are matters about content and about figures for another day. They're not for today. That was the point I think the chairman made at the beginning.
Minister, are you looking for a good day to bury bad news? Is that what this is all about?
Nope.
Well, I respectfully suggest to you, there wasn't much due diligence when you rushed into the Assembly to repeat about the 18 million. Found you man enough now to stand up and say to those contractors, I'm sorry, I got it wrong.
Well, Mr. Allister, you may have your opinions that you've formed without having the facts. I prefer to wait until I have something in
Do you
front of
have
me.
the facts?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, again, I know it's always difficult for Mr. Allister to control himself, but I think I've answered the
But
question.
do you stand over the 18 million?
The figures are not the matter today.
Do you stand over it?
Mr. Chairman, are we here to discuss those figures, or are we here to discuss the
Okay, Jim, you
process?
put the question, you're not...
Did Jim not say that Sky was going to collapse in terms of devolution as well?
Okay,
I
so
think the key point here is
Stand up, that one, Jim.
that as regards the initial statement.
Jim, do you stand up
keep
for
it
that?
order. Keep it order, sorry.
The initial
Do
statement.
you not think-
Sorry,
Sorry,
again,
Jim.
it's always difficult
Sorry,
to answer a
Minister.
question.
Sorry, Jim.
Keep it interrupted
Sorry,
by him.
Trevor. Let's have no further interruptions. Okay, moving on to the next speaker, and I'll come back to previous questioners if they want back in again. Fran McCann, Loris Kelly, any other member wants to speak on this matter?
Sure.
Okay, Fran McCann.
Jim, it's touched on some of the stuff that I was going to say, but I will have to say, listening to what has been said today, especially from officials, it's like pulling teeth trying to get a straight answer one way or another on some of the questions that has been put. But one of the questions, is there a possibility that the agreement that has been made between the housing executive and the contractors will not be acceptable to the department?
What we are looking for is...
Just ask yes or no thing, is it?
Let him answer it and then challenge the
We
answer.
are looking for sufficient information to justify acceptance of the settlement. We are broadly content, but at this moment in time, we are lacking. We have asked for more information to support the case. That's where we are at the moment. It's still work in progress, but we're hopeful of bringing this to a conclusion within the next few weeks.
You said earlier on that it would be done within days.
No, I said that the legal advice that
Legal
we
advice.
had asked, I understand that should be forthcoming in a matter of days.
Tell me this, could you tell me how many contracts have been let from January 2013?
I would have to check the detail, and I could get a note to committee after the meeting. I could give some progress update and generally where we are.
Accept that, but I have to say there's been a number of questions here asked this morning that people are going to have to go back and check the details. I thought if people were coming here to answer questions in around plant maintenance, that they would have had all the answers here to give it.
Actually, before you go on, it might actually be useful because the Minister suggested that yourself, Megs, might actually give an update on that. So perhaps, Fra, with your indulgence, if we take that information from Megs at this point, because it might actually impinge on what you want to further ask for. Is that fair enough? Okay.
Members will be aware of the contract position overall and the amount of money that was handed back last year for, I think, last year's very point of no new contracts emerging. The contracts for double glazing were committed to in November of 2013, and the planned maintenance contracts were all made at the beginning of May. I think, as I shared when I've been with committee before and taking over as acting chief exec at the start of April, when the investment machine and the delivery machine has been switched off, it isn't an easy job to switch it back on to full tilt again. So we do have particular challenges this year in maximising the spend, and that's where our commitment to our board, to the Minister and to this committee is to maximise spend and not be in a position, if we can help it at all, of returning resources. I committed when I was last with you that I was personally on the back of the contract award, going to meet with all the new contractors on planned maintenance. So we held a meeting with our new contractors and our consultants and our teams on the 13th of May with the very purpose of how quickly can we mobilise. I think committee are aware that from the contracts being let, there is a considerable legal lead-in time permitted. So knowing the past issues and some of the relationships that have been affected by our contractors, trying to work with them to build for the future, to build for this year, to get works back happening in their companies and to get works happening for our tenants that have suffered during this process. The positive position we have double glazing schemes now started on site. Those are progressing well, so that's from this month that those works are proceeding. And on planned maintenance, the good news, and our teams are working very hard, constantly on this, but we hope to have some late July starts for our ECM, our external maintenance contracts, and our kitchen schemes. So actually kicking off and on the ground, all being well from late July. The bulk of the programme, again, it should have been autumn legally that everything could have run to, but we would hope to be mobilising and starting to run to real scale from August, early September, where the projections are we'll have substantial schemes going on site. I wouldn't underestimate for this committee the challenge that we have in letting contracts late in the day, having quite a period where we weren't letting new works. So contractors, again, in terms of their state of readiness to mobilise and switch on, that's been my job in my career, and it doesn't switch on quickly. But we have right now the will of our new contractors and our own teams to get back to delivering for you, a commitment that I've given on my previous visits and give again today. Our projections, and I report to our board next week and where we are with our projections of spend. We are not yet in a position to say we have projects now fully committed to confidently spend every penny of budget. But I didn't want to and still don't, as new acting chief exec, to be starting the year saying, here's money back. I think everyone owes it to our contractors, owes it to our tenants more than anything, to pull out every stop to spend, but still spend sensibly in that process. So we're making a report to our board. We also want to dedicate time this year to planning properly for next year. A lot of our actions, again, need to get us spending the most we can this year, but really preparing to be full tilt next year again. So that's a brief update.
Okay,
So that'll be almost 2 years from the day that when contracts will be. And could you tell me how much has been lost the planned maintenance during that period of time?
Planned maintenance, for example, last year the budget on planned maintenance that was returned was in the region of £50 million.
Roughly 100 million have been lost during that period.
It wouldn't have been as significant the previous year.
Maybe.
Sorry, it might be helpful if...
Spend on plant maintenance over the last 3 years was running, about 3 years ago, around 60 million,
yep.
Maybe just over 60 million a year. It dipped to 50 million last year. And Mags, your estimates, if you can shed some light on your estimate spend in 14, 15?
Figures over the previous years, there was still investment happening, still substantial investment. 2011-12, 65 million, 12-13, 61 million, and last year had dropped down to 53 million. Our combined budgets for planned maintenance and all our regular planned activities in the region of 90 million this year, so a significant escalation. The figures, again, we're working with our new teams on absolutely what can we do if we work together and work at full tilt. We're still just now looking at roughly about £8 million that we could be looking at underspend. Again, I don't want to commit. We're giving our board an update next week, but we are still working on is there anything we can bring forward that would still be sensible spend. And I'd have to say our contractors are working hard with us on that.
Well, there's two more questions. I think I picked up, you said that, you saying that contractors that would not be able to step up to the market at short notice to deliver schemes?
That they're working with us absolutely cooperatively. I've been very impressed with the reaction from both the consultants and the contractors to get back to delivery. The point I was making is they need their time to get their workforce materials, same for our consultants, but we're coming together, that I'm seeing them pulling out every stop to work with
Have
us.
they been asked? Have they been asked?
Yes.
Have they, and they said they're not able? They haven't got the capacity to do it?
No, they're saying to us they're mobilising as quickly as they can. So that they're not saying we can, we won't work with you. They're absolutely showing a complete willingness to deliver the best they can this year. But I have to understand with them that we didn't let the contracts till May, so we're trying to work together in how quickly we can get back up to speed.
And the other thing is, to see out of all the contracts that have been let to contractors, how many of those contractors were the ones that were named by the Minister in a statement of June last year?
Three of the contractors that were involved in the contract negotiated settlement, three are players in the new contracts.
And see, during that period of time, was there any contractor went bust or went into liquidation due to the inquiry or investigation was going on?
Not my understanding in the planned maintenance side of things.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you. Dolores?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the latter points, if I could ask, in terms of the capacity of contractors and the possible underspend of £8 million in the remainder of this financial year, have you given any thought or consideration to expanding your list of contractors?
The contractors we've got 6 contractors working on the new planned arrangements. So for now, they're the people who won the contracts, have been awarded. And if we get things at full tilt, we'll be able to manage. The challenge they have, the challenge we have, is we're trying to spend a full year spend in less than a full year. And that's the bit. They are looking though at expanding their supply chains using subcontractors. So again, I want us to be working with them to try and maximise. We are looking though at other works and other projects we can bring forward legitimately within the contract allowed.
But you said earlier that you had given commitment to the Minister, the Department, and the Committee. I mean, our commitment is to our constituents who are potentially living in substandard housing. So is there flexibility within the thinking of the Housing Executive and the Department that should the contractors not give a firm commitment by a cut-off date, whether it be September of this year, that they will not be able to have the capacity to do the plant maintenance work, that the Housing Executive then will consider another tender process?
I would hope another tender process wouldn't be required, but what we have been working in the department have been very helpful in advice, is looking at the potential of creating a reserve for any jobs that run over because they've started late, that would again take away the need for any funds for tenants' investment to be lost in this process. So we've had early discussions on that possibility, and that's something again we're running alongside this, that if there's any run over of jobs, we're still able to deal with that and not have the annual cut-off.
I think it's worth emphasising previously the work was being with 4 contractors. We now have 6 contractors, which is an important change. Secondly, as was indicated there, the planned maintenance work this year will be well in excess of previous years. And the member is absolutely right that there is a substantial backlog of maintenance work, which stretches back many, many years, long before I came into the department. Stretches back to previous ministers and previous administrations, and back even to the days of direct rule, where there wasn't sufficient focus on planned maintenance. And that's why there is a lot of work being done with the Housing Executive to see what can be done to improve the standard of accommodation in a whole range of ways. And that's why I've introduced the concern about, for example, tower blocks, the fact that there wasn't a proper programme for maintaining them, we're now moving in that direction for the first time, and we're fortunate because the acting chief executive has considerable experience in that regard in Glasgow.
Well, all I would urge, Minister, is that there is flexibility within the thinking of the department and yourself in relation to any potential underspend. Could I ask, in terms then of the lessons learnt in relation to the supervision and management of contracts, and that we won't have the potential for the accusations that were flying about a year ago in relation to overpayments?
That's the careful balance I have to ensure as accounting officer, that we do pull out stops and move things forward as quickly as we can, but still with the same diligence. So sensible discussions with our contractors. We have the new arrangements in place, so with consultants, to give that extra test to make sure prices, etc., are exactly as the contract. So we have a different contract arrangement, but absolutely the bit we have to ensure is everything is sensible and well managed spend.
And we are deliberating on that kind of separately in terms of the inquiry, so that would be that with more detail.
Could just then to go back to the initial conversation, I was struck when the Minister referred to Mr Alistair and said about waiting on facts, whenever it would appear the Minister didn't wait on facts when he made the allegations in relation to the £18 million overpayment.
Could I just respond to that then by saying
Just let the member finish.
Well, where we are now then, in terms of, we still haven't had a firm timetable or schedule. I understand the legal advice should be a matter of days. Then you hand across to DFP, if I'm right in thinking. How long do their checks then take in relation to signing off on the agreement so we can put this sorry episode behind us?
Well, with a fair wind, I would hope that this would be settled by the end of July. Now, I'm making a big statement there because that assumes that DFP will be able to come to a conclusion in the normal time frame, and I can't stand over that. But assuming this is done within the normal number of days, I think that we're looking at around the end of July.
You can understand the committee's concern about some of the deadlines we've been given and time frames because they've stretched considerably.
Yeah. But that's if I can just say that, you know, this is really an accounting officer issue. We have to do the job properly.
Well,
we have to get the information.
Sorry, I can't help but laugh on top of the county office because I tend to move people around.
But that's,
you know, we you know, personally, I will be giving advice to Will. I have to stand over this, you know, and you know, and I will say if there's not sufficient information made available or the case is not made at the end of the day, I will say, Will, I cannot stand over this. I am hopeful, and we're working very, very closely with the executive, that the information that I require will be made available. And I've already indicated that broadly I think we're moving in the right direction. But until I get everything and form that judgment, and I'm hoping to be in a position to do that early in July.
You appear, Andrew, something of a rare breed in the accounting office. Somebody who's actually going to be held to account.
Time will tell. Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was just really to clarify something because in the submission it states that what steps are being taken to ensure that the approval of the agreement between the Housing Executive and contractors concludes swiftly. You then go on to talk about the Housing Executive delivered a submission to my department Friday 23rd of May, and then my staff have already gone back with queries to the Housing Executive to ensure we can fully check this complex work. Yet we've been informed that the department were kept informed by the Executive of what was happening in these negotiations on a monthly basis, I think was said. So what questions need to be asked that weren't dealt with in terms of the reports to the Executive of how these negotiations were going on? And will it reach a stage possibly that having gone through all this and the Executive have agreed and the contractors have agreed that the department can turn around and say, no, sorry, we don't accept this, and yet you've been fully informed from what you've said all along? It just seems to me that, you know, if you're appraised of all the facts on a monthly basis or on a regular basis, and then all these questions have to be asked at the end of this. Surely there must have been something lacking in the information that you were given, and all these questions still need to be asked at the end of the process.
Managing public money requires us to present a very detailed analysis cleared by our economists and therefore the DFP economists, going through in great detail, giving clarity about what assurance we can give, especially on estimates of this question of overpayments and compensation payments, using statistical analysis. We obviously have kept in close contact with our housing executive colleagues at the time of the negotiations. We've been pressing them very strongly to conclude those negotiations, but also very conscious it was a complex negotiation and it is their responsibility to complete them, and none of us must interfere with the job of the board. So we've been careful in that process. We've also tried to talk to the housing executive even as they prepared the dossier to explain the understanding of the issues that DFP will ask us. I suppose I've been 12 years in counting officer in this process. I think it's one of the most complex dossiers to kind of get through, to get approval, because it is a significant issue of write-off in this issue. We'll work very closely in this process to get this done, because we all have an interest in getting this concluded, and most particularly to get this concluded to support the board as it moves on to make sure that they learn from mistakes that were made in the management of these contracts in the past, and they have good contracts that deliver to the public. That is something which we are totally with the board on the process, and we've seen good progress. And I think in the inquiry, this committee has heard some of the work that's been done on that and what MAGS is leading at the moment. So that is, we are totally with the board in that process. But it is a complex task, and I know from experience the number of times you have to go back with the economists and another person in DFP to make sure they've got the evidence, because as I say, it is an important issue with quite significant potential of precedent, etc. We will do this as fast as we can.
Could I say, Chair, I would presume, and I think everybody accepts these were fairly complex negotiations, that you would have some degree of faith in the competency of the executive to be involved in these complex negotiations and to have the wherewithal to conclude them to a resolution that is satisfactory to all parties. Now, I would presume that the information that the executive was given would have been monitored by yourselves as to the competency of the negotiations in relation to the overpayment, alleged overpayment. We talk about it as an alleged overpayment, as it seems now it wasn't. It certainly wasn't £18 million. So, you know, really what I'm saying is, the executive are going off the contractors, they're doing these negotiations, then it almost has to be done all over again by yourselves and the Department of Finance. It just seems a peculiar way of doing things, because I would imagine if the executive have the competency, and I keep using that word, to actually carry out those negotiations, then, you know, they're reporting back all the time. It just seems
well, I'll bring Andrew here in process, but I mean that is, managing public money is based on this premise that actually, say, the system, when bodies of spend money, there are careful checks done on behalf of the Assembly. It's done by the Department's responsibility and then Department of Finance personnel. That's the way the system is of checking this issue. Clearly, we believe that that the housing executive had skills in this area in the process, but you have to then get all the documentation in the right form to get this done, so it's absolutely clear and the public can be clear, and in the housing executive's accounts and in the comments by the auditor, that you, the Assembly, have a public statement from experts on all these issues, and that's core to this. Andrew?
Yeah. The just to emphasise, yes, the housing executive kept us informed of the negotiation process, but that was very much at a high level. In the course of that process, we did not interfere whatsoever in the detail of the positions that were being presented by the executive to the contractors and the contractor's position to the department. The document that has been produced now provides us with all of that detail. So we are seeing a lot of information for the first time. And that's why we're coming to this, and that's why we have to take time so that we can understand it. There are issues about the sampling, and to the extent that the way that can be statistically valid, that it's appropriate to extrapolate and all of that, all those sorts of technical issues. Now, yes, but to deal with your fundamental point, yes, we do have confidence in the executive, in the Housing Executive, but we have confidence in, in all sorts of, DFP have confidence, I would have thought, in our ability to produce business cases and review business cases, but they still have an obligation to review the results of that. So there is a process, a scrutiny process, which we just have to go through here.
Just at the end of all this process, when everything's settled and the figures are available, will the public be made fully aware of the situation in the same way that they were made fully aware of the £18 million last June?
I would expect there to be full public disclosure on the details.
And further that, this committee has already agreed that on the conclusion of that process that we will hear again from Donald Hoodless and Will Hare around the process of all of that. So we will be returned that whatever about any other public announcements from the department and the Minister. Jim?
Sorry, three very quick factual questions. Is the sign-off within the department by the Permanent Secretary as Accounting Officer or by the Minister or both?
As it's an accounting officer.
So it's the exclusive function of the Permanent Secretary. Secondly, because there's a public expenditure issue, this matter doesn't have to go to the Northern Ireland Executive, does it?
No.
You're satisfied with that? Yeah. And to the Housing Executive, in reaching the settlement to the point where you recommended it, are you satisfied that the Housing Executive exercised due diligence in that process?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Chair, just two very brief questions. When the work does eventually commence, how can we be satisfied that given the shorter time frame, that tenants who require the work to be done will have it appropriately quality assured and that these will not be rushed jobs?
That's the comfort I would give you, that the arrangements in place, the new contracts again are quite different from the old. So we have consultants that are appointed and they have responsibilities round about quality, and we'll still have our overlay of our assurance arrangements that checks that. So that's the bit that we need to move fast but not compromise on quality or price.
And finally, the department have indicated their confidence in the work which the Housing Executive has done to arrive at these figures. Where did the figure of £18 million come from in the first place? Who gave you that figure, Minister?
Well, very simply, I'm glad you asked the question because I intended to address it earlier on there. If I could just answer the question. I did not invent the figure of £18 million of estimated work payments to the contractors. I was advised of that figure and given that figure by the Chairman of the Housing Executive Board, following a report that had been given to the Board of the Housing Executive in May 2013. The Campbell-Tickell report subsequently estimated that the sum of overcharging was in the region of 9 to 13 million. And I've already stated that although that remains a substantial amount of taxpayers' money, I was somewhat relieved that the level had slightly reduced. Now, I made it absolutely clear there, start, I didn't invent the figure was given to me at that point, having previously been given to the Board of the Housing Executive.
This is the same organisation that today have told us publicly that you have maximum confidence in, and your department officials have maximum confidence in revising these figures and doing these negotiations. How can that be?
The facts that were given to me at that point were the ones that were given to me and which I reported. As regards the Housing Executive today, I think that the Housing Executive is in a better position today than it was then.
Same.
I think that the general observation I would make is that it is in a much better position. I'm much more happy with the way that contracts are being dealt with, happy with the engagement with the executive, And I think also it needs to be borne in mind that the issue that emerged at that point was around a core issue about mismanagement of contracts previously over a number of years, something that people are aware of, and I think everyone from all political parties would recognise that there was a problem around mismanagement of contracts. We're now in a much better place. There's a programme underway, Journey to Excellence, within the Executive to get it into a much better shape. And I think all of that is particularly encouraging. That gives me reassurance.
So finally,
Can I-
Minister, do you...
Right, it may be helpful just
Just on that particular point about the 18 million, the document that we're looking at will set out a reconciliation of where we got from 18 million to the final settlement figure.
Would it also show how you got to the 18 million figure in the first place?
It will demonstrate how that was.
So,
it
Minister,
will be comprehensive.
So, Minister, can you tell us today that you share the same confidence today in the individual who gave you the figure of £18 million and who is now, through the Chief Executive or Acting Chief Executive of the Housing Executive, had to sign off completely revised figures?
I think you're well aware. I think you're well aware that the figure that was quoted to me by the Chairman of the Housing Executive, and I have to say the Chairman of the Housing Executive came into it at a time when it was in a very difficult position as an organisation and faced a real challenge, and it was good to have someone with the level of experience that he and the new Vice Chairman have. Having said that, he was given that figure on the basis of figures provided to him by officials within the Executive. I have no reason to not have confidence in the Chairman of the Housing Executive. I think he is doing a good job, along with the Acting Chief Executive, in improving the organisation and making it much more efficient. And ultimately, that has to be our primary concern. Two things. One, good service to tenants, and secondly, good value for money. I believe that they're both moving in that direction. I'm satisfied.
And given that he was appointed as chairperson of an organisation with presumably the knowledge that the organisation had serious difficulties and fault lines and flaws within it, you are not now today concerned that he didn't say to you, look, we have a problem, it's 18 million, but don't stake your life on that 18 million figure?
There are times, so I think you make an interesting point there. The fact of the matter is that if there are figures that are around and they're not given to Assembly members, then that's a fault. If I had come forward and made, or had not come forward and made any observation on this at all, it had been reported to the Board of the Housing Executive. It's important, I think, that Assembly members are kept informed, because previously ministers have been criticised for not coming forward. Secondly, it was, I think, if you read carefully, not what newspapers have said or what people's recollections might be, but it was useful actually to go back and look at exactly what was said at the time. Well, it's been stated there by Alistair. In due course, the document that will come forward will clarify all of these matters.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, as I said at the outset of the meeting, and members have had the opportunity to put questions, and colleagues have the opportunity to address their concerns. The primary concerns of this committee today is they want an early resolution, closure of this matter in terms of the signing off of the deal struck between the Housing Executive and the contractors, and an absolute assurance also that maintenance required in people's homes will be conducted ASAP, and all steps are taken to address both those matters of matter of urgency. And I have to say, I'm putting on a record that it is a case of record of confidence. I don't have the confidence on the experience that I have had, and purely on experience that this committee has had, which is why this meeting was requested for this morning, that we've been told repeatedly that the matter was on a point of resolution. We've had Andrew and other senior figures sitting here telling us that the matter was to be resolved on that very day, and yet of all we still don't have an assurance, albeit we're told we expect a resolution by the end of July. I will be delighted if I see that by the end of July or before that, or very shortly thereafter, and I hope that that is the case, and I wish you well in that regard. But it is for me a matter of confidence. I would draw your attention to the fact that Simon Hamilton, when he stood in for yourself, Minister, on the 27th of May, informed the Assembly that the discussions were still ongoing between the housing executive, and I'm paraphrasing this, between the housing executive and the contractors, and that nothing had been put forward to the department, when in actual fact you're confirming this morning you had received the documentation before the 23rd. And going back to Andrew's point, the question around the ongoing been kept up to date by the housing executive, whatever about the detail, you certainly would have been kept up to date with the direction of travel, and the direction of travel was from £18 million to probably zero. If the speculation is around the table, was members around this table are not living in a bubble, and we're hearing things may be completely untrue, but we are not dealing here today with the £18 million. We're not dealing with the process which led to a figure of £18 million today. We will return to that, and we will return to it on the basis that, as far as due diligence is concerned, and we're given assurances around the need for, and absolutely appropriately so, there is a need for due diligence in terms of public money, and that due diligence process is underway, and we have your assurance around that in terms of any sign-off or write-off of monies. I think most people around this table are not satisfied at all that due diligence actually was applied, which has led us into the kind of mess that we're in currently. But I wish as well, in conducting the negotiations, concluding the sign-off and the write-off, which most members around the table believe it actually is going to be, and we hope to hear that as quickly as possible, and that people can go on and get their homes repaired in the way in which they need to be done.
Could I just respond to the point that you raised there? At the oral session on the 27th of May, the Finance Minister, Simon Hamilton, who was standing in for me, said that investigative work has not come to the Department for Social Development yet. In fact, the material was forwarded on the 23rd of May. There was a bank holiday on the 26th of May, and officials were only aware of this having been received on the 27th of May, the very day of the orals, and there was no time to update the Minister at that point. So that is a simple explanation. It was simply due to the bank holiday the previous day, the 26th. The second thing there is to say that it's quite clear that in the past, and over a number of years, there was a system of management of contracts and monitoring of contracts that, quite frankly, wasn't fit for purpose. That brought us into a difficult situation in a whole range of ways, financial and practical. We're now in a much better position. There's a new regime in place, and I think that the result of that, with the new contracts I think are fit for purpose. We're in a much better place, and that's to the benefit of tenants and the benefit of the public purse as well. And I think that that needs to be recognised. This was a legacy issue that arose because of poor management of contracts some years ago. We're now at the point where we're in a new regime, new contracts, and I'm glad to say they are much superior to what was there previously.
And you will appreciate that the committee's inquiry has been dealing with that in phase 2, and we will conclude our judgment on that in due course. So thank you very much. So,
indeed.
Okay, Minister, thank you yourself and your colleagues this morning. Thank you. Okay, members, returning back to the agenda. Moving on to the draft minutes, which is on page 6 of your electronic pack. And the draft minutes are for the meeting on the 5th of June and on the 10th of June, and they're on pages 6 and pages 19 respectively. Could I just draw your attention to the version of the minutes for the 10th of June? They're headed as Thursday, but I should actually read Tuesday. For action. And on that basis, with no further amendments, I could have the minutes adopted for accuracy. Please for that. Okay, thank you very much. Chairperson's business is none to address this morning. Moving on to matters arising. The members are aware that next week's Thursday committee meeting, a regular meeting, was due to be held at the Assembly Community's office in Franklin Street, where we had initially agreed that we would receive formal briefings from the Assembly Community and the Council for the Homeless Youth Project Youth Speak, as well as the department briefing on the department's response to Litchfield review on work capability assessment. Now, you know that following the formal meeting, then the committee was due to have a separate meeting with Assembly Community representatives, followed then by a visit to Assembly Community Project. We agreed this some time ago. However, in due to the fact that the committee, pardon me, this week has, if you like, decided and drew some conclusions on their phase 1 of the inquiry, we would expect to have the papers back for the draft report back from the officials for that meeting next week. And in light of that, I think it probably would be wise if we agree that rather than trying to do too much on the one day, because we would have to go into closed session in the same community office, it wouldn't really be appropriate, that we would seek the agreement with the same community to defer that particular visit. In other words, to be returned to our normal business here in Parliament buildings, to enable us appropriately to sign off on the draft report.
So does that mean no Tuesday meeting?
I don't think we're advocating the Tuesday meeting, are we? You're not
at this point, Chair, but we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah. I mean, we had sort of hoped to do the report, but I mean, the officials are saying they would definitely have that for Thursday. So if we work on that basis, then we would defer the Salmon Community Location Committee business, and we will reschedule that with them as soon as possible. I will still take briefings, obviously, from the Salmon Community and Youth Speak, as well as obviously the other departmental briefing. So, and then we would then, at the end of that, here in Parliament Buildings, would move into closed session to complete the report on phase 1. Members happy enough with that?
Can I just say, just to get, we're still working to Tuesday. In fact, to circulate a report possibly on Monday, but on the assumption that there will be some discussion on that and maybe some amendments to the report, then to convene then on Thursday to address those any possible changes and to sign off.
I'm not clear. Are we meeting on Tuesday or not?
That is the case. The aim is to meet on Tuesday, but as I said at the meeting on this Tuesday,
yes,
that the aim was to produce a report by this Tuesday for discussion on Tuesday, and that's still the case. I'm just flagging up, Chair, that in case there are delays in that, we'll keep members notified.
But if you have a meeting on Tuesday, you would realistically expect you would complete that business on Tuesday. Then you could still continue with the salmon visit on Thursday.
Well, Chair, it's just that
belts and braces, just to be sure.
Well, I'm talking about setting priorities, and that if there are any subsequent changes that members may want to recommend to any report on Tuesday, that it would be better to meet here and to present members with those changes for agreement on the Thursday afternoon.
Okay, members content with that?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, then members, the next item on matters rising, we are proposing then that there be a nil response to the Employment and Learning Committee, the Working Families Bill. There's no members indicated any contribution to that. Okay, members. Moving on then to the next item, which is the SR 150. This is the Job Seekers Allowance Scheme for Assisting Persons. Members will recall that the committee had taken a view on this and tabled the motion of power of annulment of the regulations. We have had subsequent representation made directly to myself by the Minister, Stephen Farry, and I brought that to the attention of the members, and members agreed that we would put this back on the agenda today. Officials would be invited back again, although I would stress that officials have been here before and had all the opportunity to give us information. But nevertheless, the members have agreed to have the officials back at this meeting today. We've also agreed to table for consideration, if you so desire, if we wish to rescind the next decision, we are perfectly free to do that. So on that basis, could I invite then Anne McCleary, Brenton McCann and Colm Boyle. Okay, so it's just, as I say, maybe just explain there, Anne and your colleagues, or we did seek clarification at an earlier stage around some of these matters, and your officials had the opportunity to do so, but you now have the floor to make your case.
Sir, can I begin by thanking the committee on behalf of both myself and particularly my colleagues from DEL for giving us the opportunity to revisit these regs. You'll be aware of the history of this. We've briefed the committee on several occasions. The DEL committee has approved these regs. The executive has approved these regs. However, we're concerned about the implications, particularly for DEL and its programmes of the prayer of annulment. Members have already received several briefings on this regs, so I'm not proposing to go over all of that old ground. However, I do think that it's important to stress that these regs facilitate steps to success in exactly the same way as the regs facilitated steps to work. There is no change other than in the introduction of a new, improved programme on which my DEL colleagues will elaborate. In advance of the prayer of annulment, we're grateful for this opportunity to explore and, if possible, to alleviate your particular concerns. My colleagues Colin Boyle and Brendan McCann from DEL, they'll tell you a bit more about the practical outworkings of the regs.
Okay, Chair, committee members, thank you again for allowing us a second opportunity to address you on the regulations. There are a number of brief points I'd like to make, and then I'm going to hand across to Brendan, who's going to just give you a very, very brief outline of how Steps to Success will actually operate, what the impacts will be for people on the ground. In summary, the key points why these regulations are so vital. First of all, without the regulations in place, there will be no mainstream adult employment programme for Northern Ireland, and that will exclude employment support from those who most need it. At this point in time, the Steps to Work contracts for the existing adult employment programme are at an end. We need these new regulations in place to allow the new programme, Steps to Success, to come into being. Without the regulations, we will have no programme, nothing, and there is no contingency to back that up. In the absence of the regulations, no one can go on to Steps to Success without the risk of losing their benefits, as they would be unable to show that they are actively seeking work. Effectively, we would be left in a position where one government department is funding a programme to help people prepare for, secure and retain employment, while another government department cannot permit participants to access the programme without forfeiting their benefit entitlement. Without the regulations, one of the Executive's priority programme for government commitments to help 114,000 people to move into employment would be at risk, which could lead to an increase in social exclusion and poverty. As I said earlier, there will not be an alternative programme in place, and we also have a concern about the loss of the impact of that on the Northern Ireland economy, with the programme worth £30 million a year, and that money which is earmarked for investment in the programme would not proceed. There's also an issue about the implications for people employed in the Northern Ireland supply chain. That there are quite a number of people who are employed in the provider base and who would continue to be employed in that provider base going forward under Steps to Success, and they would be, no question, without a programme in place, would be negatively impacted by this. To reiterate, the regulations are for job seekers, and the benefit conditionality arrangements associated with Steps to Work remain unchanged in Steps to Success. There is no difference. These regulations in the Steps to Success programme, I would emphasise very heavily, and I tried to do that the last time, and maybe I didn't get the point across well enough, but they are an entirely separate issue to welfare reform. This programme has been governed entirely within DEL. It is not part of the welfare reform agenda. It is not part of the Executive Subcommittee on Welfare Reform. It does not report to any of those structures. This is purely a DEL programme, which is, and the governance mechanisms were put in place to replace Steps to Work some 2 years ago, and it has nothing to do with any of the plans around welfare reform. The regulations are principally around job seekers. There were issues raised the last time about ESA clients. So, for example, an ESA client on the work-related activity group can agree to participate in this programme and will be accepted onto the programme if their employment service advisor, one of my staff, agrees that this is the right thing for them. So there's a double lock in terms of whether they participate in the programme or not. And as I said the last day, there are other programmes in place such as Work Connect to help people in that category if this programme is not the right one for them. There is no mandation for any ESA client, and there's nothing in these regulations associated with that. Finally, any former ESA client who is appealing the outcome of a work capability assessment will not be referred to Steps to Success until the outcome of their appeal is known. And even then, if their appeal does not work and they are then designated as a JSA client, it could be some 9 to 12 months, depending on their age, before they're referred to the programme in the first place. So, in summary, this isn't part of welfare reform. This is a replacement programme for an existing programme which will enhance and improve that programme. And I'd like Brendan just to give you a feel for some of the enhancements that we're bringing, enhancements which have been extensively shared with the Employment and Learning Committee over a series of meetings, which have been subject to a full public consultation.
The main changes really relate to the flexibility of the programme and the fact that it will be individualised, so that people's barriers to work will be initially diagnosed by the providers and a programme of action then put in place. Unlike previous provision where the department specified that claimants would follow a particular course like an essential skills strand or a back to work strand, the provider will be given the flexibility to do what works for the individual. The length of time that the provider has to work with the individual has also been increased, again to make it more personalised, so that they will have up to a year for normal JSA clients and 18 months for those who have got additional barriers, essential skills needs or particular social issues that perhaps are presenting as an employability barrier. And in the round, we feel that the longer duration, the more focus on the individual should help achieve better outcomes in terms of sustained employment. The providers will be paid on the basis of the number of jobs that they sustain. They will get an attachment fee, but the bulk of their funding should come from sustained employment fees, and that should be a big driver to improve performance. And we're quite hopeful, given the information that we have researched, that this scheme will lead to people in Northern Ireland being upskilled for the opportunities that present.
Thank you. Mickey and then Stuart and then Michael.
Thanks for the presentation. Obviously we've got a lot more information today because one of the reasons that we were looking at this was because the work activity related group is creating an anomalous group of people who really hadn't been there before as such. But we weren't told about these contracts and how that would impact. There's no mention of 30-40 million pound contracts before. You know, we were simply dealing with the regular. Now, if the committee is going to make a decision on any of this, it has to be an informed decision. And you have to have all the facts, not some of them, or part of them. So this whole issue around contracts and how that would impact the economy and all, none of that, we weren't aware of any of that. You know,
okay, now, I apologise if we haven't said
no,
that.
No, but you know, because you can only make decisions when you have all the facts. Now, it's going to affect about 3%. I think of the people involved. 97% will be away from that particular group. And obviously one of the things that we have to do is protect the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. It was accepted, for instance, people with mental health. As we went through all this in 2007, if somebody presents with, say, a bipolar, how does it, you know, in terms of a work focus interview and that kind of thing, or a client advisor, what training do they have to come to any conclusions about that? We were told at the time, oh, there were going to be all sorts of healthcare professionals, in my view, and then certainly that hasn't happened. But the point is, all about the contracts and all of that was not mentioned, so we weren't aware of that. The other thing too is, one of the issues around this is sanctions. Now, sanctions don't work. That's been proved over many, many years. They simply don't work. They don't serve the purpose for which they were originally intended. So is it possible to get assurances from the department, from DSD and DEL, that we would be kept informed that there would be a monitoring exercise, say, in a 6 months period, to find out how many people on these particular programmes were sanctioned? Because one of the issues is this whole thing, if you don't attend an interview without good cause, and that's a very arbitrary kind of issue, and always has been. What does good cause mean? It may mean something to you, it may mean something to me. So if, you know, if there assurances were able to be given by the department that this would be monitored, the outcomes and the targets of these particular schemes, because you mentioned it's going to upskill people and all of that, and how many people are sanctioned, because there are people, you know, when we talk about these being voluntary, that could change with the regulations and the guidelines. What's voluntary today may not be voluntary in a week. And that has been proven over many, certainly in my
Well,
experience,
it would be coming back to
over
you,
many
of course,
years.
obviously, if we did change the
No,
regs.
I understand that, but you know, then we'd have to go through the same process all over again. But really, it's asking for assurances from both departments that this scheme will be closely monitored and that sanctions imposed, that we would have the details on that, because then it gives you a much more informed process. And that is something I feel that in coming to any decisions that the committee has come to, we didn't have all the facts. Because if it's going to impact on other people's employment, which you've said it will do, if it's going to impact on the economy, those are different issues. You know, we still have a duty of care to those vulnerable people, and the department also has a duty of care to them. But I think it's imperative that we are aware, when we make these decisions, how it is going to impact holistically, not just in bits and pieces.
I think it's fair to say that we can give you those assurances. We will ensure that it is monitored, and we'll come back to the committee if requested.
Yeah, and we would anticipate, if we look at the sanctions that we've had in place, over 140,000 starts and steps to work from began in 2008 to March 14. Just over 4,000 sanctions in that time, which is just 3%. So I would be surprised if it differed greatly from that.
That's fine, thank you.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Having been in contact with a number of employers who provided steps to work opportunities, I think one of the criticisms of that is the 6-month time limit, and therefore an extension of that would be very welcome, both for employers and by people taking opportunities to use the scheme, because it gives them the opportunity to complete a skill set, which I think would be very useful. One criticism I would have is that the training that is provided can often not necessarily match the skill set that the individual already has, and there seems to be an attempt quite often to drive people into a little box to make them do something which many quite often have. I'm primarily talking about basic IT skills, and the training seems to be rather inflexible. And I think that's an area which needs to be looked at. Hopefully, Steps to Success will address that area because there's more time.
Well, not only will it address it because there's more time, it will also address it because there's less prescription. And I think under Steps to Work, there was a lot of payments made for activities which clients would have gone through.
Yes.
Whereas this is much more driven about the needs, the flexible needs and the personalised needs of the individual, matching those needs to what an employer is looking for. So there's very much, whenever a Steps to Success provider gets in contact for the first time with an individual, to try and match them for what's the right opportunity with employers. They're also working actively with an employer base as well. So they're trying to work end to end to do that really skillful match. And the skilling, the upskilling that Brendan talked about will be key. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Wider explanation, which is interesting. Could I just, without being pedantic or cynical, go back to without good cause, which is a very interesting phrase? Are the parameters of without good cause the same now as they always were?
Yes, exactly the same.
Is there, or are there any possibilities where interpretation could be placed where a person might be treated differently in one part of the country or another country, or another part of the country, due to the individual officer or the individual circumstances, or is it tied that tight that everybody be treated the same, and that where someone appears without good cause, that an examination takes place to see if there actually is a good cause underlying that, if you follow, because as Michael said, there are people who find
as you
great
know,
difficulty.
good cause isn't defined in law. It includes any fact which could probably have caused a reasonable person to act the way the claimant did. So the decision makers have to take account of all the circumstances, and that could include local situations, including in particular the claimant's physical or mental health. I mean, I can give you a few examples of what would count as good cause, but you probably, to be honest, have heard them all yourselves. I'm not going to teach my granny here.
But what I'm really driving at, if someone, for no apparent reason, continually acts in a way which is deemed to be sanctionable, that some consideration being given to looking just below the surface to see if there is information anywhere else that would indicate that there's a problem that may not have been identified in other areas of the social security system, particularly around mental health?
Yeah.
I know it's an almost impossible ask.
Well, it's not. I mean, we have a number of people who specialise in disability within our organisation. We have a review ongoing where we want to put in more specialisms into the front line. We've also put a requirement on the provider base to make sure that they have well-experienced, well-qualified individuals who will work on steps to success, who can actually gauge this and make the referrals to the necessary professionals if these kind of issues keep on recurring. It'll not be perfect. There'll always be issues with that because it's not an exact science. But I'm confident that we can improve that. The other wee thing I would like to say is that in other jurisdictions, frontline advisors such as our own in Dell would be targeted in terms of the number of people that they would refer for sanctions.
I understand that, and that's right.
We do not do that.
No, I understand.
And we will not do that.
No, good.
So there's an entirely different mindset. The mindset that we have within Dell is not focused on trying to remove someone from benefit. It is focused on trying to get them work and keep them there and help them to stay there. So the barriers that we're talking about, there could be any number of barriers as to why someone can't find a job. Mental health certainly could be one of them, but it could be and it's normally not just one thing. There's normally a range of factors holding somebody come back. Yeah, and it's a difficult one for our frontline always to call.
The one other thing that I would ask is the way in which a sanction is notified. Will they be told face to face? Will they be told by a standard computer letter or by telephone? Because in going to possibly the worst case imaginable, which is just the way I am, that someone receives a letter telling that they've been sanctioned on the day when, by reason of some disability, they're not feeling particularly good. Those things can be devastating.
Our role in that is to, if we've got an issue in respect of the compliance of a job seeker, is that we would refer the matter to the decision makers in DSD. Decision makers in DSD then look at the case and they make the decision. In terms of how that's actually practically communicated, I'm not certain. So we need to check on that.
I'll come back to you on that.
Could you? Because and quite a lot of folk who find themselves in that category have actually great difficulty in reading and, more importantly, understanding what the thing says.
You know, they take a lot of effort. They talk about a customer journey, telephone touch points and various things, various areas that they work in. I'm not just sure of the reality of how this is done.
Okay, I'll admit that.
That's fine. Okay.
Okay, I think the final member, Trevor.
Thanks, Chairman. And you said in your opening comments in terms of the executive, this went through the executive, was all the parties represented in the executive supportive of it?
As far as I know.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Okay, members content them. They've asked all their. Please stay with us, folks. So members content them. They've asked the relevant questions, got the relevant answers they wanted, or got anyway. On that basis, could I thank yourself, Colin and Brenton, for coming back this morning and giving the committee that information and addressing the issues raised. Okay, members, on that basis then, you have in front of you, I mean, just cut the chase, I mean, you have the ability to rescind the initial decision if you want. Are members happy enough that we, I mean, I'm trying to get the mind of the committee here, so are members of a mind to rescind the initial decision? Agreed. On that basis then, I read that formally on the record, that the Committee for Social Development agrees to rescind the motion agreed at its meeting on the 5th of June 2014 to annul the statutory rule SR 150/2014, the Job Seekers Alliance Schemes for Assisting Persons to Obtain Employment Regulations NI 2014. Members agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much, members. And then, as you are aware, the annulment debate is scheduled for Monday the 23rd, it's Monday coming. And then when the Speaker then moves the motion, or seeks to move the motion, then as chairperson of the committee, I will simply state not moved. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then to the next item was on the agenda, which is item number 74, the Warren Pilot Scheme. We have a departmental briefing. That's on page 23 of your pack, and we formally welcome Eilish O'Neill, Stephen Martin and Oliver McHugh to the table. Can I just excuse myself for a few minutes, and Deputy Chair will take the chair for a few minutes.
That was
Put a bit of order, please. Thank you. Just like to welcome Eilish, Stephen and Oliver. Stephen's becoming a permanent fixture at the committee and all sorts of rules. So I just ask you to brief the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to come along today to give you an update on the consultation responses that we have received to our Achieving Affordable Warmth proposals. We have previously briefed the committee on the pilot exercise that had been carried out, but I would like to give you some brief background to this just to refresh your memories. Since 2001, the Warm Home Scheme has been the Department's main tool in tackling fuel poverty. The scheme has helped to improve over 120,000 homes across Northern Ireland and has invested over £150 million in energy efficiency measures. It has been a very successful and popular scheme, and it is a self-referral one for people who are eligible by virtue of certain benefits and for those people who own their own home or who are private tenants. Despite the work that we have carried out in warm homes, rates of fuel poverty have continued to rise. We believe that a change of approach is needed to find and assist those households who are most affected by fuel poverty and who, for a variety of reasons, have not sought help from the Warm Home Scheme. The Fuel Poverty Strategy was published in March 2011, and it committed the Department to looking at new ways to find and deliver energy efficiency improvements to vulnerable households. So following publication of the strategy, we commissioned the University of Ulster's Professor Christine Liddell to conduct a review of the fuel poverty definition. And that definition, as you're well aware, says that a household is in fuel poverty if it needs to spend 10% or more of its income on its energy costs. So the university found that of the 42,000 households across Northern Ireland who are living in fuel poverty, there are approximately 33,000 homes that are in severe fuel poverty. That is, they need to spend between 15 and 20% of their income on their energy costs, or extreme fuel poverty. That is, they need to spend more than 20% of their income on their energy costs. To help the Department locate those homes, the university developed an algorithm which is GIS-based and uses data from a variety of sources, including income, benefits, location, average temperatures and tenure of the property. And to test the accuracy of this mapping tool, the Department worked in partnership with local councils across Northern Ireland and colleagues in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to use the maps and to survey the homes in the census output areas identified by the algorithm. Now, this pilot started in July 2012, and we have already briefed the committee on the outcome of that work, but it is worth mentioning that the rates of fuel poverty that we found in the targeted areas averaged 78%, and that over 50% of the householders in the targeted areas were aged over 60. In June 2013, the second stage of the pilot began, and this was to see if the economic benefits of grant funding for energy efficiency improvements could be made available to suitably qualified local installers. And this was using the experience that we had gained from the boiler replacement scheme. And in the boiler replacement scheme, over 1,800 installers have been able to carry out work under that scheme. And in the second phase of this pilot, there were over 450 local installers who carried out work as part of this energy efficiency pilot. So following both of these intense and valuable pilots, the Department proposes to introduce a new affordable warmth scheme, which will make key changes to the delivery model, the qualification criteria and the energy efficiency measures available, and which will build on the partnership work and developed in the pilots with staff and councils and the Housing Executive. Now, Minister McCausland has already agreed to extend the existing Warm Homes scheme until the 31st of March 2015 to allow a gradual ramp-up of the affordable warmth at the same time that there's a gradual withdrawal of the Warm Homes self-referral scheme. And a series of proposals for the new scheme were developed and issued for public consultation, which ran from the 17th of February to the 9th of May. And we issued a copy of those consultation questions to the committee on the 18th of February. The consultation proposals were subject to an equality screening exercise, and the final affordable warmth scheme will also be subject to equality screening. We have received 66 written responses to our consultation, and we had over 100 attendees at 6 events which we held throughout Northern Ireland. We received 20 responses from councils, 12 responses from the heating and insulation industry, 18 responses from the voluntary sector, and 16 responses from others. The consultation set out 7 proposals for targeting, for partnership working, for the private rented sector, eligibility criteria, for the energy efficiency measures, for self-referral and for client contribution. Our first proposal around targeting said that the Department believes that the affordable warmth pilots have demonstrated that a more targeted approach works and brings assistance to those who need it most. The Department proposes to continue with this targeted approach in the new affordable warmth scheme. And there was significant support for a more targeted approach to tackling fuel poverty. 71% of respondents were in agreement, and of the 14% who said they disagreed, there were some concerns that the opportunity to self-refer would be removed completely from a new targeted scheme. There were 15% then of respondents who were unsure or who did not specify what their particular preference was. Our second question was around partnership working. The Department proposes to work in partnership with local councils to target households most at risk of fuel poverty and to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. Council staff will conduct an initial home visit to assess eligibility for the householders under the scheme, and the Housing Executives network of grant offices will work closely with the householder and a local installer of the householder's choice to deliver the improvements. The response to this was that there were 64% of respondents who were in agreement with this approach. There were 15% who disagreed, and it would be fair to say that they were suggesting a more active role for their particular organisations in the partnership arrangement. And there were 21% of people again who didn't specify or who were unsure about how that would work. Our third proposal then was around the private rented sector. Now, the Warm Home Scheme is open to applications from owner-occupiers and from private tenants, and private tenancies currently make up 17% of the housing sector. Since 2001, the Warm Home Scheme has improved the energy efficiency of over 19,000 privately rented homes, and the Department is committed to improving the energy efficiency of low-income tenants who live in the private rented sector. However, the Department believes that private landlords have a responsibility to ensure that the properties they are letting have adequate heating systems and adequate insulation. And there is evidence that the Warm Home Scheme improved the energy efficiency of properties of some landlords with large portfolios, over 50 properties in some cases, and this was never the intention of the scheme. The Department proposes that where an application is made to the Affordable Warmth Scheme by a tenant living in a privately rented property, that the landlord must A, have registered with our Department's Landlord Registration Scheme, and B, we are proposing that the landlords make a 50% contribution towards the cost of the work to their properties. Now, there was a mixed reaction to this proposal for landlord contribution. There were 40% of respondents agreed that the landlord should contribute. There were 20% who disagreed. Their main concern was that if the landlord refused to contribute, then tenants would be the ones who would suffer. And there were 40% of people who were unsure or who didn't specify how they felt in relation to that particular proposal. We then asked a question about eligibility. The Department proposes to change the method of assessing eligibility for the scheme by setting an income qualification threshold instead of using social security benefits as a passport. The University of Ulster's analysis of the first phase of our pilot showed that in the areas that were targeted using the algorithm, people were on predominantly low incomes. Half of the households surveyed had an income of less than £12,000 per annum, and 2/3 had an income of less than £16,000 per annum. So our proposal was that the household annual income level be in line with other government programmes, such as the level of income which is used to determine eligibility for free school meals, which currently sits at £16,190 per annum. Now, 54% of respondents agreed that eligibility should be determined by using household income and not simply on using benefits as a passport. Of the 13% who indicated that they disagreed with the proposal, most were concerned that the proposed threshold was too low. And then there were 33% who were unsure, who did not specify. But it would also be fair to say that of that 33%, there were questions asked of the Department as to what would be included as income. Our next question then was around the energy efficiency measures. And the Department proposes to retain all of the energy efficiency measures which exist under the current Warm Home Scheme. But we have proposed that there were some additions that would be made to the existing list. And the additional new measures are around the conversion of existing Economy 7 heating systems to a high-efficiency storage system. Under the present Warm Home Scheme, if someone has Economy 7 and they don't want to change to oil or to gas, then we don't do anything to upgrade their system. But there are new, more energy-efficient systems now available, so we're proposing to introduce those into the scheme and to let people have that choice. We're proposing that there's boiler replacement for eligible applicants who are aged over 65 with boilers over 15 years old. The introduction of heating controls, the replacement of existing radiators where they're needed, the removal and the replacement of ineffective cavity wall insulation, and draft proofing measures to be reintroduced back into the scheme. 68% of respondents agreed that all of the energy efficiency measures available in warm homes should be retained, and they agreed with the proposed new measures. Of the 8% who said they didn't agree, they wanted more measures added to the list. For example, there were many people who felt that windows should be included as an energy efficiency improvement. Many respondents also suggested that boilers over 15 years old should be replaced in all eligible households and not just those with the householders aged over 65. There were other comments from some of the respondents as well, and this was around the accreditation of the installers who would be used in the scheme. And again, there were 24% who were unsure of whether or not this was a good idea. Self-referrals. The Department proposes that the new scheme is primarily targeted at households identified by the University of Ulster as being most at risk of fuel poverty and suffering from severe and extreme fuel poverty. And the Department sought views on whether or not the scheme should include some element of self-referral. And 74% of respondents felt that there should be an opportunity for households who meet the criteria but who aren't in a targeted area to have some element of self-referral into the scheme. 5% of respondents disagreed with any element of self-referral. As I said, they felt that watered down the targeted approach. And again, 21% didn't specify. Our last proposal, and perhaps one which caused a lot of comment, was around client contribution. The Department proposed to set a grant limit which will deliver appropriate energy efficiency measures to low-income households. However, there may be occasions, and indeed there have been occasions under the Warm Home Scheme, where the work that's required to a property exceeds the grant maximum amount. These have normally been hard-to-treat properties, and where the Department has had to walk away because the work required exceeds the maximum amount of grant that's available. So what we were proposing was that there would be an opportunity for a householder, in the cases where this may happen, to make a contribution themselves to make sure they can utilise the grant available, but if they pay a top-up to have the work that's required carried out. This got a very mixed response. 54% of people agreed, 16% disagreed because they felt any scheme should pay for absolutely any measures that have to be delivered. And again, 30% of people were a bit unsure as to how this would actually work and didn't specify. We are now considering, and we've just finished considering all of the responses that we've received, and we are setting out proposals for the Minister to look at our new affordable warmth scheme. We are confident that the new approach and the enhanced package of assistance will build on the success of warm homes and will help those who are most affected by fuel poverty.
Thanks very much for that. Just a few questions before I bring members in. Obviously, you've said the proposed delivery model is significantly different from the one that's currently used. And obviously, one of them is giving the householder the authority to use a local installer, as opposed to large organisations, which happen at the moment. In terms of the local installers, are there quality benchmarks being put in place to ensure that the work is of the required standard?
Yes, for the second phase of the pilot, which operated in Mid-Ulster and Newton Abbey Council, they began by holding an event for local installers where they brought everyone along, gave them information about the scheme, asked who would like to be involved in the scheme. Anyone for insulation, anyone must be gas safe registered. There must be a member of an accredited and have an accreditation to do insulation. Now, for oil installations, this was slightly different, and under the boiler replacement scheme, we did not ask for people to be Ofhtec registered, and that was simply because there were a very small number of installers across Northern Ireland who had registered with Ofhtec. But any work that's carried out under the scheme, insulation or heating installation or boiler replacement, has to receive building control sign-off, so there will be a building control inspection of any of the work that's completed under the scheme.
Thanks. Obviously, I've mentioned the private rented sector, which is a huge sector now for people, particularly in relation to social housing, and that landlords would be expected to make a 50% contribution. And if that proposal is adopted, how would you compel the landlord to make that contribution? Because this is an issue that's been going on for a long time. The private rented sector is not regulated. You get a huge amount of housing benefit, like 200 million a year, and yet there's no regulation. There's this sort of light touch landlord registration. But how could you compel them? Because obviously it's going to affect a lot of people, and as you say, a lot of people in the private rented sector are on benefits. They're not particularly well off, so wouldn't be in a position to actually install the facilities themselves. So is there going to be some sort of mechanism by which the private landlord can be compelled to actually do that work?
It is a particular problem. In our conversations with colleagues in the local councils, and particularly in Mid-Ulster, who carried out the phase of the pilot, with the reform of public administration and duties which passed to the council, which will compel homes to meet certain standards, they feel, certainly as they are involved in knocking the doors and encouraging householders to take up the measures, that they would have some powers. Whether or not they would be wide-ranging enough to make someone increase the level of insulation in a property, I'm not sure that it would have that effect.
But it just means that there are going to be a huge swathe of people who are not going to benefit from the scheme, who could benefit from it.
I think it's worth maybe just saying, Deputy Chair, that we are looking again at the contribution level. I think the principle that landlords should make a contribution is right, but whether 50% at this stage, I think we're looking at that, and it may be a lesser contribution, which then might incentivise more landlords to be involved. But I think one of the things we need to do very carefully is monitor this, and if we find there are private sector tenants who are not getting access because landlords are not getting involved, then I think we need to rethink this.
It's also worth comment that some of the landlords who attended our public consultation events were in agreement that landlords should make some contribution, but they were a small minority of the landlords that exist across Northern Ireland who attended the events. And it is also worth noting that there are people at the moment who don't benefit from Warm Home Scheme because landlords don't give their approval to measures being carried out to properties which they privately own.
I have just two more quick questions. One of them, and it's an ongoing issue at the moment, certainly I've come across, I'm sure other members have, at the moment in the boiler replacement scheme, in that building control, there's a fee charged by local councils, roughly about 60 to between 60 and 80 pounds. Will that be covered?
Yes.
Because that has proven to be a stumbling block for people, particularly people in benefit, who simply can't afford that.
Yes, the building control fee will be included. I think it's fair to say that building control fees were something which didn't really feature in Warm Homes because the fees weren't being charged for a long period of time, but it has become an emerging issue, and the building control fees will be included as part of the grant.
And just a final question from me before bringing members. Back in December, the committee received a written briefing from Professor Liddell of the University of Ulster, noting that the main cause of fuel poverty is low incomes, because you can't divorce fuel poverty from poverty, and rising energy prices ran energy inefficient housing. So do you believe that the proposed actions will actually reduce levels of fuel poverty?
In our strategy, we say that we want to remove energy efficiency households as a contributor to fuel poverty. The work of Mid-Ulster Council and Newton Abbey Council, when they were involved in the pilot, meant that assistance they had within their council areas for oil stamp saving schemes, they were able to advertise those and inform people whenever they were knocking on the door that there was help in to budget for energy
I
available.
suppose that the point I made, and I've made it before, is you can have the most efficient energy system in your house, but 70% of social housing here is relying on oil-fired central heating. So if you can't afford the oil, it doesn't matter how efficient your system is. And if you consider what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, oil prices are sure to go up, so that just increases the problem, and that, because it's a global issue, it's not a local issue in any sense, that is out of control. So, you know, it's just that's something I think that always has to be factored in, because if people can't afford the actual fuel, they can't use the system. I just want to make that point. Fra, and then Dolores, and then Trevor.
Sure. It's just one of the questions. It's changing from a present scheme that has obviously a large not-for-profit organisation involved in the delivery of it, to people bringing in an individual, people to do a thing. Surely there'll be a huge cost differential between what a not-for-profit organisation can deliver and the charges caused by individual private enterprise.
No, there's going to be the housing executive. I mean, I assume Mr. McGann's talking about Bryson. I mean, Bryson is one of the two contributors, and actually, while we can't divulge, because it's commercially sensitive, the different rates, there is, Bryson contract that work out, so it's no cheaper than other providers. There will be a schedule of works produced by the Housing Executive and a cost attached to that schedule of works. So there are ways of controlling the costs within this. So it actually won't necessarily, in terms of completing the works, there will not necessarily be any cost differential.
Now, tell me this, to see in terms of if somebody has a plan for this scheme and they're bringing someone in from outside, is there a set price that will be paid annually? Yes. But will there also be a thing there that would be acceptable that people can't go over in terms of what they're being charged by a private?
There will be a set price, and I think, Eilish can comment more on the pilot, but in terms of the pilot, we didn't find any difficulties with that. It was a set price, and there were a large number of installers who were willing to do the work for that price.
The payment is made directly to the installer on the production of an invoice, so there wouldn't be an opportunity for someone to inflate a price and to give a householder a bill for some additional works that haven't been carried out.
See, in terms of this, why would the department not go to the public procurement exercise?
It's possible to do it that way, but I think one of the issues that we've heard from members of this committee in the past and from others is the importance of involving small and medium-sized enterprises. Public procurement traditionally ends up with larger providers, and I think this is an opportunity, learning from what we did in boiler replacement, to spread the benefits of this scheme more widely, and I think that's something that certainly we've been urged to do in the past, and we're responding to that by doing it in this way. There would be an option to do it the other way and use the same approach, but we feel from our experiences with boiler replacement and our experiences with the Affordable Home Loans pilot that spreading the economic benefit of this is to be welcomed. And as Eilish said, boiler replacement, 1,800 different installers right across Northern Ireland have got work out of this, rather than through Warm Homes, a very small number of larger installers, and the quality is as good.
Okay, Dolores.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation. Can I say I welcome the income eligibility? I've often been concerned about people who were obviously living in poverty but were one penny out above the income for a benefit. So I welcome that, and I welcome the fact that it's consistent with free school meal provision. I think that's entirely sensible. You mentioned something in your presentation around large private sector landlords. I'm aware of, for example, Mahon Road, former military site in Portadown, which was owned by a significant developer, and all of the houses were brought up to standard. Will this address those concerns whereby somebody's property is brought up to standard because of social tenants without them having to have made a contribution?
Well, but yes, that's what's intended by this, because if we through this pilot knock on the door of a vulnerable household and ask them to evidence their income before we offer the grant funding that's available, it doesn't seem right that we don't ask landlords to make some sort of a contribution for the properties which they own. And the evidence from the information that we had from the review of Warm Homes and looking at the private rented sector who we have assisted, and many were smaller landlords with only one or two properties, but there were several large portfolios of properties who benefited from Warm Homes.
I think it was Turkingtons that owned the properties in Portadown. Was there any condition attached to that sort of pilot project, that the tenant was secure in their tenancy agreement as a condition in the past?
Yeah, under the existing Warm Home scheme, there was no security of tenancy that we could give. What happened was we said that the rent, it was a stipulation that the rent could not be raised simply because there had been additional measures introduced to a home, which then increased the standard of the home for 2 years after the installation of...
But there was nothing to secure their tenancy. Then just one final point in terms of holistic approach to warm homes. Will this address some of the criticisms in the past where you did a wee bit here and a wee bit there, but there wasn't a holistic approach?
Yes, it's an area-based approach, and it'll use the information that's been gathered, with each council being provided with a list of the addresses of the top 25 census output areas which have indicators of severe to extreme fuel poverty in their council area, so they can go in and encourage people to take up the measures that are on offer.
And there will be monitoring of the department of the council's oversight, and
it's a partnership, very much a partnership arrangement, but there will be reporting mechanisms whereby we are aware of the areas that are being targeted and the number of referrals that are being made and the number of homes that are being assisted. Yes.
But it'll be targeted on the basis of objective and areas of greatest need.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trevor.
Thanks, Chair. Can I say, maybe following on from Stephen, I welcome the fact that you're going to spread the load in terms of the installation, because something I found from one of the previous programmes where there was a fixed amount, some of those dollars were going in and telling us exactly that fixed amount of money and taking that fixed amount of money, and it could possibly be done for less. So they were drawing down more money than was actually necessary. I think that brings a competitive edge to it. And the only thing I might disagree with you said quality might be as good. It could actually be better in some cases. The other thing I find as well, and more of our senior citizens are concerned sometimes about bringing workmen into their homes. Whereas if there's a familiarity in terms of a local firm or a local supplier, then they're more likely, the trust element of that is reinforced in terms of that elderly person, and at the same time they're getting the benefit of the adaptations to their house. I haven't the register of interest. I am actually a landlord, so I declare an interest in that. But however, in terms of the landlords making a contribution, and I mean, I personally have no issue in that, but I think it's not necessarily a good idea, because the client again is suffering if landlords are not bringing. But I think you should put a caveat in there to actually protect the investment from DSD in terms of how long they maintain the property. I think there's another way of doing that, so that the client who is in the house actually gets the benefit, as opposed to. I can see where some can argue that a landlord could benefit in terms of an enhancement of property, but at the same time, the person who's in the property, and most of these people are doing it for investment reasons, the person who's in that property is losing out. So I think there could be a tie-in mechanism. I'm interested in the other point where you make, where sometimes landlords won't permit the adaptations to be made, even in the past. I think again that has been. It's actually difficult to understand why they would have done that. But again, given that so many landlords are in receipt of money from the housing executive, I think if they're in receipt of DHSS clients where they're getting housing benefit, then there should be something tied in there to make the landlords not be able to refuse the adaptations to the house to make these houses more quality. And I mean, if it's not already happening, I think that should be looked at, because landlords are receiving considerable amounts of money from housing benefit. But if they're taking that, and at the same hand they're saying, but we won't let you bring this house up to a standard, then I actually don't think you should be getting their money. So I'd like maybe if some work to be done around that, Stephen.
We can certainly, Chair, we can look at. I mean, the difficulty is that's social security legislation, but we can certainly look and see if it's a possibility. It's unlikely to be something we could introduce immediately, but it's something that we could look at as a development or an enhancement to the scheme if it's possible to do it.
Well, I think statistically it's proven that private landlords versus housing executive sector, the housing benefit rates paid to private landlords is much higher. So, I mean, there should be a bit of carrot and stick in this here. Landlords shouldn't be benefiting, but at the same time disadvantaging their tenants.
Okay, Trevor. Okay, it's difficult to sum up. Miguel, you might want to be able to sum up in terms of the broader discussion. Maybe just because I was absent for that element of it, but and I apologise for that because I had another engagement to attend here. But the only wee point I wanted to make just was, and I think Fra was dealing with some of that, was the paperwork or the documentation submission from Energy Brazil. There was some, so I wouldn't mind if the department could take that and maybe give us some response at a later date to some of the broader issues around that, about social impact bonds and social enterprise type of involvement and all this, but I don't want to be opening up the debate again because I know you've already dealt with at least part of it, so I would just hope to forward you on that document conflict really just for some response. On that basis, Mickey, do you want to just sum up that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've outlined the proposals, and in general terms, ultimately people may well benefit from it, and it's an improvement on the previous scheme. I think from the point of view of the providers, there is this whole issue around local providers and how that may work. I think Trevor made a valid point about in terms of the familiarity, particularly for older people, because there is that issue that people aren't necessarily willing to have strangers come in. And I know my own experience where the providers were previously Bryson and H&E Mechanical, I think there was a fair degree of satisfaction there, but obviously there's been a rethink about that. In terms of the outworkings of it, obviously it's been the current scheme, I think, has been extended for a period until 2015. So presumably in the interim, all the issues will be taken and the evidence will be taken into account, and there may well be changes to your proposals, and obviously you'll keep the committee informed of that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Mickey, thank you for that. Stepping in the chair as well. So on that basis then, I'd like to thank yourself, Oliver and Stephen, for your presentation here and engagement with the committee this morning. Thank you. I know you're back on again for the next item. So the next item is number 8 on the agenda, the review of 40 people again with the departmental briefing. And we have Irish again, Stephen, with joined by Finbar Cummins. So on that basis then, could I just hand over, Eilish, yourself and Stephen Finbar?
Thanks, Chair. Supporting People, as you know, is a scheme to help vulnerable people live independently. We are doing a review, a value for money and policy review of Supporting People. And really just this morning, I just want to sort of briefly take you through why we're doing a review, what the parameters of that review is, how we're involving stakeholders, what we've done so far and what we're planning to do next. For us, it's fairly simple why we're doing a review. Over £600 million of public money has been spent on supporting people since 2003, and there has never been a value for money study. So for us, it's vitally important that we look at this. There's also a case going forward that we need robust evidence to support any future resource bids. There will be a comprehensive spending review coming up in 2016 with the new Assembly, and it's really important that we prepare for that with robust evidence to demonstrate the value of supporting people and what it achieves. But we're also keen to continue on the journey of continuous improvement around supporting people. There's been quite a lot of work done by my colleagues around the contracting, around the regulation, around the administration, and for us there are other things that need to be done, so this review will help to support continuous improvement. The terms of reference are available on our website, but in essence there are 3 main objectives. The first is to look across each client group, and there are a number of client groups who are supported by supporting people, and look at the expenditure over the last 11 years and to make an assessment as to whether or not that has met need. The second one is then the value for money question of, having got that information, make an assessment of the extent to which supporting people has delivered its services in an efficient, effective way. And thirdly and finally, to look at the enabling environment for supporting people, whether we've got the right legislation in place, whether we have the right strategy, whether we have the right policy environment to make supporting people as successful as it can be. And then coming out of that, the policy review will make some recommendations on the future. I suppose in terms of the questions of how we're doing it, I have responsibility across the whole of housing policy, so I'm drawing in staff with particular expertise from right across my team. So I have Eilish and Finbar, I have statisticians, and I have economists, and we're doing the review in a modular way, so we're breaking it into chunks and using the skills that we have internally, but we're also bringing in external expertise. We have already commissioned, and it's been published, a value for money study on the floating support element. This week we've just appointed a researcher to do a value for money study on the accommodation-based provision in supporting people, which will support us, and there are other pieces of research that are going on, so it's a mixture of us and external parties, and we're also engaging with stakeholders. Our aim is to have a draft report by early 2015, working towards a final report by next March. There's a big task, but that's certainly what we're trying to do. In terms of involving stakeholders, I think we've had some very good and quite robust exchanges already with provider representative organisations, CRISP, who represent all the supporting people providers, and the Federation of Housing Associations. I think it's fair to say that any time you look at a policy, those who are providing services get nervous. So there has been some degree of nervousness, but we've tried to reassure, and we've had some positive engagement. We're also setting up a project advisory group, which is an opportunity for providers to bring their views and comment on where we are. And we're holding workshops with providers in the autumn. For us, probably as importantly, if not more importantly, we're trying to engage service users. So through 2 particular pieces of research we're doing, our researchers are going to be gauging the views of 80+ service users and their families across all the client groups. This is quite skilled work because a number of the people who receive supporting people services are vulnerable. They have mental health issues or learning disabilities, so it wouldn't be appropriate for us as untrained policy staff to do that. So we're bringing in experts to engage service users. We're trying to cast the net quite widely and get views from right across. Progress so far, early days, we've only really started this in the last month or 2. And I suppose the progress so far has been primarily around 3 different things. The first is we've done some targeted work on blockages, which Mr Brady will know well from the Health Committee, in terms of blockages to delivering new supported housing. And we've worked with Health Trusts, the Health and Social Care Board, housing associations and the housing executives to identify what those blockages are. We are in the process of developing a set of proposals which we're engaging with external trust funders and government departments to get funding for those, and they're essentially to do 3 things. 2 of them are research focused. One is looking at, for older people and for people with physical disabilities, what the future models of supported housing should be, drawing on best practice from both Northern Ireland and more widely. Second is focused on particular schemes which the committee will be familiar with, which have been less successful, like Angara in Fermanagh, and where there have been particular issues, and trying to look at why those issues have happened and what we can do to resolve them and what we can learn from that going forward. And thirdly, and very importantly from our perspective, there's a great misunderstanding of what supported housing is. And certainly when housing associations try to build new supported housing, they get a lot of community opposition. So for us, there's a big communication piece around communicating what supported housing is to communities, to families, to individuals, to health professionals, to housing professionals. So we are hopeful that we're developing those proposals, as I said, and we're hopeful to secure funding to start that work towards the end of this year. The second thing that we've done is we commissioned and have completed a value for money study on the floating support part of supporting people, and that's available on the Housing Executive website, and we can certainly give the committee a copy of that if it would be helpful. Thirdly, there's a whole suite of research that the Housing Executive have done on supporting people and older people that we're going to draw on. And as I mentioned, finally, we've commissioned new research. There's 2 particular research projects that the committee might be interested in. The first is looking specifically at resettlement, the Bamford Agenda. So we're looking at the experiences of people with learning disabilities and mental health issues who have been resettled from long-stay hospitals as a result of Bamford. And secondly, we have commissioned, as I said, and just recently, just yesterday actually, appointed researchers to do a value for money study on accommodation-based provision under supporting people. I suppose what's next? There's a lot of work started. We're at an early stage. We, in terms of the bits we're doing, are gathering evidence and taking stock of what we have. As I said, we've commissioned research, which is just starting. And we're working through the individual bits of the review, and we're trying to secure resources to deliver the proposals that have come out of our work on unblocking new supported housing. And we are developing with providers the systems and fora which we'll establish in the autumn to engage with them and get their views. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I just ask for bringing members? Because I've raised this before and I still think there's a gap in there somehow. I mean, I do appreciate the information you've given us this morning about the project working group and then engaging with service users and so on, but there are people out there who can't yet become a service user because they can't get a facility, and I've raised it from the point of view that there's a particular cohort, and I don't know the number of it, and this is part of the problem, that there are young people who would be with perhaps educational needs, and I know parents of young people now in the 20s, and those parents are saying they're getting middle age and older, and they're thinking about their own mortality, and absolutely then concerned about the well-being of their sons or daughters who are in this category at the moment, but yet can't find a process within which they can actually identify they have these needs, and they do need some level of supported housing. And it is an issue between housing and health, I understand that. So how do we address those people out there who have those concerns? There isn't a list. You can't go, any other householder or applicant for a house can go and find out where they are on the waiting list and many points they have. That's not applying in this case to an awful lot of people. So how do we actually address or reach to those people or make them aware that, say for example, there might be a service available, or even your review of the policy and so on can be, informed by this particular need, because it doesn't seem to be quantified as yet.
I think if I deal with the information bit first, I think there was an issue picked up in our research on floating support, which said there are lots of people in Northern Ireland who need those services who aren't aware of them. So there's very much a communication and information piece, and that's one of the things that we've identified as a need. In terms of the policy review, I think that's a really well-made point. I'm not sure right now how we would try and identify and engage with that group that you've identified, Chair, but we'll take it away and give it some thought. Because it is really important that we engage with people who aren't accessing services now, but who have a need. So we'll take that point away.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Mickey?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Obviously, sitting in the Health Committee, there are those overarching issues. One of the things that the Health Committee were dealing with recently was the whole definition of supported living. What does that mean? Because people have different views. We had a presentation from a professor who deals specifically with that area, and she's saying, well, it's not that to get a specific definition might not be that important in a sense, because it's really how you deal with it. Because if you take transforming your care, the whole concept in a sense is predicated on the notion that people would remain in the community. If you don't have the facilities in terms of supporting people, supported living within that community, then you just can't do it. And we visited with the Health Committee supported living place in down country, and it was specifically set up for people, older people, but also people who had mild dementia, and then obviously that would progress. The place you mentioned in Enniskillen, one of the issues there is no uptake, for whatever reason, and yet in my constituency, the Nicola Fold, people are queuing to get into it. So it can depend on regional variation, I suppose. But ultimately, it's a health and DSD issue. And it seems to me that there needs to be a lot more engagement with the two departments, because the Minister, DSD Minister, has admitted that the number of houses built for supporting people weren't reaching their targets. So you're going to have a situation where health on the one hand is pushing ahead with transforming your care, or well, trying to push ahead with maybe a better phrase, and then you don't have the facilities there. So this whole shift left, taking the 83 million or whatever into domiciliary care and away from acute, isn't going to work if you don't have that in place.
Absolutely.
And if you can have the supporting people aspect of it, but if you don't have the physical infrastructure for them to go into, then it's not going to work.
No, I think that's a vital point. On the review, we have an oversight group for this review, which is ourselves, the Housing Executive and the Department of Health, and we're also sitting on the Department of Health's review of adult social care, so we're trying to be more joined up, but I take the point, and I think it's a very valid one, and that's why we tried to do a bit of work on how we could unblock new supported housing. I think there's quite a way to go, but we're trying to make a start.
Paul?
just want to absolute agreement there with Mickey. I know in my own area that there's people crying out for supported living. It's really interesting that there hasn't been a value for money study done since 2003. You know, that's a bit scary when we look at the amount of money that has gone into that and other things that we have here in the Assembly where there's studies done on them constantly and they don't amount to that amount of money. I'm really encouraged by it. I think it's fantastic. I wish it had been much sooner than what it is now, and you know, it will be interesting to see what the final remarks on it are. Another thing as part of it, I assume you're looking at is lifelong housing as well. I know within Rathkill we had recently built a house, Rathkill Close. Houses were built there and they were lifelong houses, which meant that people will never have to move from there because of the adaptations, which is another wonderful idea, especially if we look at working hand in hand with transforming your care and keeping people in the communities. No, I'm excited by this, that this is being done, and it's certainly for all of us, whether, I mean, I know Nicky, I was on the health committee as well with Mickey and had been around various places as well, but for all of us as constituency reps, I mean, these are the problems we get through our offices day and daily. So it would be good to have something final there to say, well, this is what we plan to do.
That's great, thank you. If I could just make a comment, I think, thank the member for those points. I mean, Lifetime Homes is built in very much to our design for housing association properties, and it's I think the evidence that it works is that £1 million a year is spent on adapting housing association properties to meet the changing needs of tenants. £11 million is spent in the housing executive on the same function, and the housing executive, there's only 3 times as many housing executive homes, so you know there's a massive differential. So Lifetime Homes is working. One of the other things that perhaps we'll come to the committee with at some stage in the near future is we've done a really good piece of work on flexible design, which we're going to be building into our housing association guide, largely in response to welfare reform, where we're going to encourage housing associations to build 1-bed units that meet the needs of welfare reform, but 1-bed units that can be adapted as circumstances change. So if it's a young couple, for example, that unit can be adapted fairly cheaply into a 2-bed unit at a later stage when children come along and so on. So that's quite exciting work, but I think there's a lot of value in there, and that's very much what we're trying to do, is trying to be a bit more innovative and a bit more imaginative about how we design and build our social housing.
And that also picks up on people with your lifelong homes as well, who have an illness, who then will require a 2-bedroom unit because of equipment or care or whatever they might need.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well, so it's not just young people, and it's not, you know, it's people with illness as well.
Okay, From McCann.
Sure, just the couple of points. One, that it seems to be a very extensive piece of work that's been done, and I think, as Paula said, it's probably long overdue in terms of the planning, and obviously you can't satisfy everybody when it comes to it. But one of the things that Alec raised, I think that's crucially important, and how need is assessed. And I know that needs assessment is done by the housing executive. It's usually somebody in the district that's been allocated that particular thing. Sometimes it doesn't always work. But the level of points that's been allocated, the types of assessment of particular need isn't in many ways what it should be. Well, that will be built in as part of the assessment, because if it's done right, then it can start to deal with some of the questions that Alec had raised.
Yeah, I think there are 2 separate issues, I think, here. There's supported housing, which is more akin to general housing, like sheltered housing, which is allocated through this selection scheme, and it's done on a points basis. And one of the issues that housing associations have raised with us is that brings anomalies with it. So there have been examples, for example, where that has led in some areas to younger people with mental health issues such as schizophrenia being put into sheltered dwelling totally inappropriately. So there is an issue that we're looking at through the review of allocations policy as to whether sheltered housing should be allocated through the generalist route or whether there is a need for a more specialist solution, because just relying on the selection scheme and points isn't necessarily, for that particular type of housing, isn't necessarily the best answer. A lot of the supported housing that we have, the more specialised housing, is dealt with outside the selection scheme, and the needs assessment is done by Health and Social Care Trusts, because they have the expertise in terms of the particular conditions or issues that individuals have. So those are complex needs cases which were dealt with in a different way. And I think, Chair, you referred to it earlier, that there's no waiting list as such for that because it's a different process. But I'm not sure that that process is well understood, and that's something I think we might want to shine a bit of a light on in terms of the review.
But there's a complex needs person each district office with their housing executive, and they rely on the people that you're talking about to supply the information. So it's a bit of joined up working there to try and overcome some of the stuff that I think it's
absolutely.
Mickey, final point.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm glad somebody's excited about any aspect of welfare reform, but we're not going into that discussion.
No,
it was just it was just around the disabled facilities grants, because as of the hearing, they're taking a huge amount of time to process, and people who actually need those are having to wait far too long, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Just to follow Paula's point about lifelong housing, Trinity Housing Association in my own constituency built 5 or 6 houses, and if you look at those compared to the houses that are around them, you have wider doors, you have ramps, you have recyclable water, you have places where a lift needs to be installed, they don't have to knock down half the walls and all of that. So it's just a good money saving idea, and it's a bit of forward thinking, and obviously that's something that needs to be built upon, maybe the shoes upon, but certainly your single bedroom dwellings, I'm not fully convinced.
That was a brief point, but there you go. Okay, members content with from what we've heard. Stephen, Elise, Finbark, thank yourselves for being here this morning and addressing some of the issues raised, and we'll get some feedback around the matter was raised there earlier on. Okay, thanks very much. Good morning. Okay, members, we'll have just a few subordinate legislation and so on to go through here. If there's indulgence, we'll try and deal with these fairly quickly. Okay, so item number 9 is the SL1, the Pension 2012 Act, Transitional Consequences of Supplementary Regulation. These technical and transitional provisions. Are members content for the rule to be made?
Great.
Yep. Take it there. Okay, members, thank you. Then the SL1, the Pension Protection Fund. Members content that this rule be made?
Great.
Great. SR 1560, Social Security Reciprocal Arrangements. That's on page 54 of your pack. The members content for that rule?
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thank you. We don't need to read that in the motion. We're content on that. The rule,
that particular rule, it's not subject to assembly procedures, Chair.
All right. So thank you for that. Okay, so SR 162. Social Security Recovery of Benefits, lump sum payments, so on and so forth. This would be subject to negative resolution procedure and is expected to come into operation on the 1st of July 2014. If members are content with that, I'll read the motion into the record. Okay, that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 162/2014, the Social Security Recovery of Benefits, lump sum payments, amendment, regulations, Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objections to the rule. Members, agreed? Agreed. SR 167, next item 13, again subject to negative resolution procedure, come into operation on the 30th of June. Members content, so I'll read this in the record. Okay, then that the Committee for Social Development has considered statutory rule SR 167/2014, Child Support GB Reciprocal Arrangements Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objections to the rule. Agreed. Thank you for that. Correspondence, you'll have your memo on page 86 of your pack, and members content to note the correspondence as part of the pack. If that's the case, then the members then, item 15, content to note the forward work programme on page 203 of your pack. Okay, thank you very much, members. Anything under AOB? Nothing to raise under AOB. The meeting stands adjourned. We're back here then on Tuesday the 24th, 2014 at 12 noon again in the Senate chamber. We now do adjourn. Thank you very much, members. Thank you.
Room 29.